wonderful spirit there is here tonight. How many can say that they're glad to be here Wednesday night?
People wouldn't understand the chronological order of the Bible. That's what I'm here trying to do. I'm here trying to establish a foundational knowledge of the Word that you can get into the Bible and study. There's no greater joy than studying the Word of God and to read the Word of God. In between the books of Malachi and the book of Matthew, God did not speak to the nation of Israel, and His presence was absent. Now, what does that actually mean? He destroyed the temple. He took all the golden vessels of the temple, but nowhere in the Bible, in the Old Testament, did He say He captured the Ark of the Covenant. Nowhere. The Ark of the Covenant, being where the presence of God was residing onto, was absent. So as they took the vessels of the temple and brought it to Jerusalem, everything that happened transferred over there. God was still speaking. The Heavenly Father was still speaking to the nation of Israel through prophets, as He always has before. Daniel is one of the pre-exilic. He's not a pre-exilic, but he is a captivity prophet. Now, when I say the word exile or exilic, I'm referring to the captivity. That I found, and we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. Most theologians think it was 586. Some think it's 587. As Nebuchadnezzar came into Jerusalem, he met Jeremiah, who was bound in a pit because the prophecies that Jeremiah was preaching to the nation was not accepted by the nation of Israel. They didn't want to hear Jeremiah. And here comes Nebuchadnezzar, an ungodly man, an ungodly character, who saw Jeremiah and lifted him out of the pit. There is so much to learn about the person of Nebuchadnezzar. He could make decisions of life and death as the Babylonian king. He could look at somebody and instantly he could either say life or death. He was the king of Babylon, and as Israel rebuffed they did not want to give tribute to Babylon. He just got tired of it and came in and destroyed the temple. And the temple that he destroyed was Solomon's temple. Now, I want to start, the 400 years starts with the destruction of the temple into the captivity. But I really wanted to get into tonight the preaching and the teachings of when Israel came out of Babylon back to Jerusalem. So in your Bible, let's turn to Daniel chapter 5. Literal understanding of the events of the Bible and events of history, even between the books of the Bible, can allow you to build a foundation that you can build and learn spiritual things on. If I can read the Bible and look at Nebuchadnezzar and how he came and lifted Jeremiah out of the pit and get a spiritual understanding of that, we can do that. Because I want to tell you, there's a lot of spiritual meaning in the Old Testament, and sometimes we as Christians, we don't read the Old Testament because we simply don't understand it. I did say that it was chronologically out of order. So when we read the Bible from book to book, to some Christians, as I've talked to in my lifetime, they say that it's hard to read because they're trying to read it as a book. They're trying to read it as a novel. And the Bible is more than just that. It's a living word. In the 5th chapter in the book of Daniel, we want to read, and this is one of the most, I love the story of Belshazzar. Belshazzar was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, either his son or his grandson. When Nebuchadnezzar became a wild man, he lost his mind. They drove him into the wilderness, and there the most powerful man in this world at that time was eating grass like a cow in the pasture. And he only came to his mind when he looked up and he says, "You are the Most High." And his mind came back to him. Nebuchadnezzar is, and I think, I'm not going to give you homework, but let's read the story of Nebuchadnezzar tonight when you get home. So this week, and I hope you read the book of John, all three books. I'm not going to ask you if you did or not. But I really wanted to, last week, to show how in the spirit that we're up against. So this week, let's read the story about Nebuchadnezzar, and that is in the book of Daniel. But tonight, let's read in chapter 5. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to thousands of his lord, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he has tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and the princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that they taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine, and they praised the gods of gold, and the silver, brass, and iron, and of wood, and of stone. And this is the verse that I really want you to pay attention to. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. How would you like to see a heavenly hand come down and write on the wall? For Belshazzar was not a godly man. To see these things must have really stirred him. But there's a great story in Belshazzar's feast. Later that same night, outside, and the whole Babylon was drunk at this time. But outside of Babylon, which is now Iraq, live about 50 miles or so outside of Baghdad. And if you remember the wars and Iraqi wars that's happened the last, 20 years, Babylon was very prevalent because Saddam was trying to rebuild Babylon. But outside of Babylon during this time, when they was drunk, stood the armies of the Medes and the Persians. They was ready to conquer Babylon. For the handwriting was judgment. How many can see the handwriting of the Lord today? Who can really say, who can say tonight that I can see the handwriting on the wall? There's judgment coming. The people of this world cannot act and do the things that they want to do without some sort of repercussions. Jesus and the Lord is going to bring the judgment upon this world. I'm not a prophet of doom. I'm not a prophet of doom. But let me tell you something. I can read the writing on the walls. And as Belshazzar was shaken in the very thing of seeing this handwriting on the wall, he brought in his astrologers or his soothsayers, everybody and his magicians into the temple and asked them the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, did. They could not understand the handwriting on the wall because they could not understand the language. But Belshazzar's wife remembered Daniel. Daniel came in and he told him what the handwriting was about. And in verse 25 it's this, in the same chapter. And this is the writing that was written, many, many tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Many, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Daniel was a man of God. He had boldness of the Lord. He was a true prophet of God, and that's what we need today. Tekel, that were weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Any other man who would say something like this to the kings would have been killed. But you know what? Daniel's done this before, so he was probably very comfortable with it. Perceives, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. I can tell you the third ruler in the kingdom didn't last long, because as soon as that happened, Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, and Darius, the king of Medes, they came into Babylon and they took it over and they conquered it. And Babylon was no more. One thing we need to know when we look at timelines: Jerusalem, the temple was destroyed, and all the Jews was exiled in Babylon in 587. In 539 BC, Persia entered, because of Belshazzar's feast, entered Babylon and thoroughly destroyed it. So in about 4 years after that, we're looking at the Jews being allowed to go back to Israel. And all of a sudden, when they decided to go back into Israel, there was silence. And a lot of times when people ask me, why was there silence between the book of Malachi and the book of Matthew? Because I can simply say that everything that God ever wanted to say has been said. It took 400 years for the gospel to penetrate the known world. And when the Jews went back to Jerusalem, they took back the things that was left. The Ark of the Covenant was missing. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. That is very important to understand in the scope of history. So what did they bring? They brought back probably the menorah. They brought back probably the brazen altar, the altar of incense, the things that Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar didn't melt down to wage war in the world. But it's when they return is when the presence ceased. Persia had always ruled over Israel from Babylon, and that made Israel's rule in Jerusalem a puppet nation. They couldn't do anything without the Persian king telling them what to do. When they returned, Zerubbabel, being the royal priesthood the royal king from David, he rebuilt the temple, and it was called Zerubbabel's temple. And when I mean rebuilt it, it was no longer Solomon's temple, it was now being called Zerubbabel's temple. Nehemiah returned to rebuild the walls, to rebuild the defenses, because everybody in that day wanted Israel. That was today. All the nations around Israel want that little sliver of property. They want that place because it's so important to the end time. And it was so important back then as well. The priest from Zerubbabel's temple heard that Alexander the Great army was in Syria, that's northern of Israel. His army was fixing to come to destroy them. This is legend, but I find this very interesting because this week, this mosaic on the synagogue in northern Israel was found. Most people don't believe that the high priest of Zerubbabel's temple came and talked to Alexander the Great and told him the prophecies of Daniel. I personally believe it because Alexander the Great spared Jerusalem. He's the only army that was encamped outside of it didn't destroy it. But this mosaic right here, if you read the news, shows the high priest talking to Alexander the Great. Archaeology is very important. The world will always say that this didn't happen, that didn't happen. And if we ever witness to this world, we need to start giving them answers. Archaeology is amazing. So they found this in the synagogue, and you can see Alexander the Great's war elephants on the upper right-hand corner in his army. You can see his diadem, his crown around his head. And the high priest is very visible right there, being the one with the white beard and the white hair. But Zerubbabel's temple is the one that they were part of. And during this time of lack of presence, lack of direction from God, they developed their own traditions. They developed how they wanted to do things. They developed a Pharisaical and a Sadduceical system. Just like we do today in American churches. When we don't have the presence of the Lord, we start incorporating tradition. Alexander the Great conquered the known world. And when he discovered that he was mentioned into the Torah, he spared the city. He even not only spared the city, but when the high priest showed him that he was the he-goat that hit the ram and destroyed Persia, he was very interested in that. This is where prophecy meets world leaders. This is where prophecy gets to be known and shown to the world. His understanding that he was a he-goat, he had a little horn coming out of his head, meant a lot to him. He printed coins that had a little horn coming out of his head. There's a lot of worldly people today that say that Daniel's prophecies is so right, spot on, that there's no way it can happen. But we just saw a mosaic that was 1,500 years old that says different. So how many of us is going to go out and when we witness say, this is what I learned this week? That the Bible is real. Well, I said last week that people suffer from disbelief. And we really need to start looking at truths and incorporate that into our spiritual foundation. That way, when we do talk to people, we can get their interest. When I talk to people, I talk about things that they tell me it's not real, and then I start talking about historical facts, which really has no spiritual meaning, but it does change the conversation for them to look at me and go, what? It's a very good tool to use. Alexander, when he died, somewhere, I guess around 323, his generals fought for power. His generals divided his kingdom into 4 parts, illustrating again prophecy of Daniel. Because when that noble horn was broken, it sprouted into 4 little horns. And there's no greater understanding of that than seeing a chart of ancient Greek as this area right here, including today in the Middle East and in the Orient, it's completely being fought over the same areas. We have the Greek and empires. We have Ptolemy in Egypt. Alexander the Great, when he conquered Egypt, he kicked out or he destroyed the pharaonic Egyptian, I guess the royal kings that was there, that's been mentioned throughout history, and he established his rule in there. And when Ptolemy, his general, took over, he just incorporated his rule, and he became, in his descendants, became the new pharaohs. This is where Cleopatra comes from. Cleopatra was not Greek, was not Egyptian, she was Greek. So Alexander and his four generals, they not only conquered the known world, but they incorporated and became those known worlds. Seleucus, how I pronounce it, he controlled Jordan all the way down to Arabia, which we call Saudi Arabia now. He controlled all the way up into Turkey. He controlled the Persian and the Median Persian. Persia today is called Iran. Media, that we call the Medes, was northeast or northwest of Iran today. Those people still exist. They have different languages. Assyria, that we see in the Old Testament, are called the Kurds today. Northern Iraq, and if you have been reading about Fallujah, you know that it was very, very close, about 30, 40 miles from the ancient capital of Assyria called Nineveh. Most of these places are still fought after, like I said, in the ancient world. We have the other kings, and Antiochus Epiphanes. came from the Macedonian. The yellow area and the green area are going to be the two other generals that fought for control, but Antiochus Epiphanes really gained control over that area. Antiochus Epiphanes is a very unique individual, as we'll read over here. He was in Egypt at the time, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees heard that he died and started celebrating. Well, Antiochus Epiphanes wasn't happy about that, to hear that he died. So he marched into Israel and Jerusalem, and he profaned the temple. He killed thousands and thousands of Jewish people. And this is where the Jewish people get their holiday of Hanukkah from. Because as he not only defamed the temple, he sacrificed, I guess it was a goat, a pig. Yes, it was a pig. Thank you. He sacrificed a pig in the temple and took that blood of that pig and scattered it everywhere around the temple. But he left this one container of oil that was not touched by pig blood. And that one container of oil is what the Jewish people consider Hanukkah. Because that one container of oil was only supposed to last one day, but it lasted 8 days. That's their basis of celebration. And this is what happened during this time. Antiochus Epiphanes was driven out of Israel by a group of people called the Maccabees, and they established an independent nation, an independent rule over Jerusalem, over Israel, and this is the time that they ruled, and the only time that they ever ruled Israel again was what year? 1948. Can you imagine having that long period of time between when they ruled that nation? They was no longer a puppet nation. Greece didn't tell them what to do. But then came another country called Rome. They didn't have a king. They didn't have emperor during this time. As a matter of fact, when the Romans overthrew their Etruscan rulers in Italy, one thing they wanted never to do is to be ruled by a king. What does a republic do? Well, a republic is a senate or a congress today. That's what our government is based on, is the success of Rome. Rome had a senate, and they had an army that was unstoppable. They wasn't interested in warring against the kingdom of Epiphanes. They wasn't interested in warring against Ptolemy. They was interested in controlling the Mediterranean or the Great Sea. They had wars called the Punic Wars against Carthage over that very thing. They wanted to gain control of the sea. Today, when we have our wars and we wage war against other nations, the first thing that we try to do is gain air superiority. Well, back then it was water superiority. And the Romans had that in their favor. So every nation that Rome conquered, what did they do? This is what the rise of Rome was all about. Not only did they conquer that nation, but they protected that nation. They Romanized that nation. They became Rome. So no longer was there invaders from Greece. There was no longer invaders from Carthage bothering the new areas, because then those nations would have to face the wrath of Rome. This is what made Rome so powerful. Is there any questions about today's lesson?
You had mentioned that Sanhedrin on October 13th, 2004, they reformed the Sanhedrin and said, like you said, they had no power.
No power, because they're not political government.
Right. But something significant just happened this recently in August, where they appointed their first high priest in the preparation of the temple.
So what does that mean? The time is coming short, ain't it? Now we know about Iran. Iran is a very similar situation to Israel. That nation is controlled by priests and whatever. If Israel can become if the Sanhedrin can become a political power in Israel, time is short. How many can see the handwriting on the wall? How many can see judgment coming? History repeats itself. And it's bold to show you that it repeats itself. All we have to do is next week I'm going to finish off with how Rome came into to be an emperorship instead of a senate. And this is where the New Testament begins. Because the spirit of Antichrist was manifest itself in this world through this 400 years, and this is the time that Jesus was born into. We're coming into the book of Matthew because the book of Matthew doesn't record Herod rebuilding the temple. It just introduces him already being there. So a lot of things has happened. Because not only did Herod was the go-between between the Sanhedrin and the Rome, he had a tough job.